in Russian military's principal individual weapon for nearly 7 decades, and it is a testimony to the brilliance of the design that it defies replacement and instead lends itself to further modification. The most important change to the original AK design took place in the 1970s with the adoption of the AK-74, which, instead of the original 7.62mm intermediate round, used a lighter 5.45mm high-velocity round, which gave the weapon greater accuracy and improved lethality. The AK-74 in turn gave way to the 1990s vintage AK-74M, which introduced composites to the design, giving it that characteristic black rifle look, and included a number of other improvements to improve its durability and facilitate the use of night vision and aiming devices. Now the Russian military is facing a choice of whether to stick to the time-tested design or to adopt a new assault rifle that would replace the venerable AK. The list of AK-74 challengers is a long one. The first proposed replacement was the Nikonov AN-94 Abkan, whose remarkable 2-round burst technology was unfortunately offset by the weapon's complexity. More recently, the Ratnik individual soldier system, profiled in an earlier edition of the Russian Defense Report, prompted the Russian military to solicit proposals for the AK-74 follow-on. 2 rifles were entered, the AEK-971, whose balanced action design virtually eliminated recoil, and the Kalashnikov concern's AK-12, which was designed by Vladimir Zlobin. After a prolonged series of trials, the Russian Ministry of Defense made a decision in February 2015 in favor of Kalashnikov's AK-12. The AK-12 combines its predecessor's best qualities with improved accuracy and ergonomics. Its design allows the operator to perform key operations, like releasing the magazine or manipulating the safety and selector switch, with one hand and without the need to take the finger off the trigger. The AK-12 is also better suited to accept a variety of attachments, such as sighting devices, laser designators, forward hand grips, night vision devices, and the associated mounts, such as the Picatinny rail, which has become a world standard, and without which no modern rifle can do without. In addition to the standard AK-74 and RPK magazines, the AK-12 can use the newly designed 60-round and 90-round magazines. Does that mean that the Izhmash plant will soon be churning out millions of AK-12 rifles to replace the AK-74 series weapons currently in service? It does not appear likely. Part of it has to do with Russia's ongoing budget pinch, which has forced revisions to a number of other defense procurement plans. But the bigger reason is that the AK-12 just does not offer enough of an advantage to warrant such a dramatic rearmament. Russia is not unique in that respect. The US military has held several major competitions to identify a successor to the M16 and M4 weapons, and yet these rather flawed rifles will continue in service for decades to come, because the potential replacement's performance advantage is insufficient to warrant the cost. The May 2016 decision to equip the newly formed National Guard with AK-74M rifles is one of the indicators that the Russian leadership is instead opting in favor of continued modifications of existing rifles with the designation of AK-74M3. Several hundred of these rifles, referred to at the time as AK-74M Obvez, were seen already during the victory parade in May 2015. The AK-74M3 introduces a new buttstock design, a new hand grip, and changes to the receiver cover to facilitate the use of Picatinny rails, in addition to other improvements. The AK-12, on the other hand, will most likely be purchased in relatively small numbers for use by specialized and elite units, much as the way the US and other NATO countries issue more advanced and expensive designs to its elite forces while retaining older weapons in service. As is usually the case, the question of the relative importance of the AK-74M3 and the AK-12 to the Russian military will likely be shown by their presence or absence at this year's and future victory parades.
Russian Special Operations, Spetsnaz, units have a long history of accomplishment dating to as far back as the Spanish Civil War. However, until recently, their role was mainly conceived as providing support to the concurrent ground forces through the collection of intelligence and the destruction of key facilities in the enemy operational and strategic rear. With the end of the Cold War, the likelihood of lengthy land campaigns involving huge armies has diminished. The danger of nuclear escalation means that major powers are unlikely to commit their armed forces to conflicts where they might encounter other major powers' forces on the battlefield. The decay of the post-Cold War globalization world order means more countries slipping into state failure and falling prey to radical non-state actors using terror and other forms of unconventional warfare against which conventional forces are a less than ideal tool of coercion. Finally, the political and financial costs of placing large ground formations in combat means that air power has become the preferred military and political instrument, in large part thanks to the legal fiction promoted by the US and NATO that airstrikes do not represent violations of the target country's sovereignty. The above-mentioned developments have only enhanced the importance of special operation troops around the world, and Russia is not an exception. Where conventional forces cannot be used due to their inability to operate covertly, special operations troops make an attractive choice which can help to avoid the danger of military or political escalation. Russia's special ops troops have demonstrated that ability when, under their polite people guise, they ensured that the people of Crimea were able to exercise their right to vote on their and their region's future. The presence of a sizable force of highly trained operators was sufficient to deter Ukrainian nationalists' attempts to disrupt the peaceful political process in the way that they were able to do at the Odessa House of Labour Unions. Their professionalism also enabled all of the standoffs with the Ukrainian forces on the peninsula to be resolved amicably and with a minimum of human casualties. The rise of international terrorism has also kept Russian special operations troops in action since the 1990s, mainly during the conflicts in Chechnya and Dagestan. In the process, they acquired valuable experience at counterinsurgency, but hopefully will prove sufficient to deter Islamic State infiltrations into the Russian Federation territory or the territory of its allies, particularly if ISIS operations are effectively nipped in the bud. Russian special operators likewise proved adept at maximizing the effects of Russian air power over Syria by identifying and locating terrorists, then guiding aircraft and their munitions to the targets. Special Operations Officer Alexander Prokhorenko, who performed the air forward observer function in Syria when he was killed in action, illustrates both the importance and the danger of that mission. These missions were all performed by the Spetsnaz brigades subordinated to the Russian General Staff's main intelligence directorate, GRU. In recognition of special operations' importance in future conflicts, the Russian Federation formed the Special Operations Forces Command, KSSO, whose headquarters became operational in 2012, or right in time to influence the rapidly deteriorating international situation. KSSO's existence is intended to establish a cadre of experienced senior officers who will participate in operational planning at the strategic level, promote unified doctrine and training standards, and in general raise the profile of special operations forces within the Russian military. As of early 2016, KSSO had at its command 7 Spetsnaz brigades, each with between 4 and 6 Spetsnaz detachments, totaling up to 1,000 troops each. 2 additional brigades will be formed by 2020, and the number of special operations troops assigned to individual military districts will likewise be increased, though the KSSO's control will not extend to the National Guard Special Ops troops or the specialized naval Spetsnaz detachments. Because of the high demands of their missions, Spetsnaz troops undergo a lengthy selection and training process. Due to parachute training and the generous provision of wheeled light armored vehicles like the Tiger or the BTR-82A, as well as light utility vehicles and ATVs, these units possess high strategic and operational mobility, though their lack of artillery or tank support means that they cannot sustain lengthy battles without support by friendly militias or armies, or the airborne forces which represent the next level of escalation.
Would which has become a world standard and without which no modern rifle can do without. In addition to the standard AK-74 and RPK magazines, the AK-12 can use the newly designed 60-round and 90-round magazines. Does that mean that the Izhmash plant will soon be churning out millions of AK-12 rifles to replace the AK-74 series weapons currently in service? It does not appear likely. Part of it has to do with Russia's ongoing budget pinch, which has forced revisions to a number of other defense procurement plans. But the bigger reason is that the AK-12 just does not offer enough of an advantage to warrant such a dramatic rearmament. Russia is not unique in that respect. The US military has held several major competitions to identify a successor to the M16 and M4 weapons. And yet these rather flawed rifles will continue in service for decades to come, because the potential replacement's performance advantage is insufficient to warrant the cost. The May 2016 decision to equip the newly formed National Guard with AK-74M rifles is one of the indicators that the Russian leadership is instead opting in favor of continued modifications of existing rifles with the designation of AK-74M3. Several hundred of these rifles, referred to at the time as AK-74M Obvez, were seen already during the victory parade in May 2015. The AK-74M3 introduces a new...
This is the arsenal of illegal firearms that's now in the hands of the NYPD, the biggest gun bust in New York's history. More than 250 weapons were seized, many brought into the city on board buses, sometimes a dozen at a time. 19 people have been arrested from 2 separate smuggling rings, alleged to be operating out of North and South Carolina. They're states with looser gun laws, and the illegal weapons could be sold at a higher price in New York, where restrictions are much tighter. The arrests followed a year-long undercover investigation.
This is the biggest firearms takedown in the department's history. Detectives discovered that Walker easily obtained guns from individuals in North Carolina who knew of the brisk business he could do in Brooklyn.
The arrests come at a time when Mayor Michael Bloomberg's crime-busting police reforms are the subject of fierce debate. Last week, a judge ruled the controversial stop-and-frisk search policy unconstitutional for discriminating against African Americans and Latinos. The mayor said these arrests validated his tough stance.
Our administration has pursued a concerted and coordinated effort to crack down on illegal firearms. Efforts that combine tough legislation, innovative litigation, and smart, proactive policing that makes it much more likely that if you break our city's gun laws, you'll be caught.
Law enforcement officials have long referred to an iron pipeline, where illegal weapons are smuggled from states with lax gun laws to those like New York with tougher protections. This seizure appears to have put part of that pipeline out of business. Nick Bryant, BBC News, New York.